Orange. I've lived here for 11 years and I write books for kids. So far, I have two published middle grade novels. The first is called Annie's Life in Lists, which came out in 2018. And the second is The 47 People You'll Meet in Middle School, which came out last year. I have a third called Elfie Unperfect that's coming out next year, and also a picture book with a pub date that's TBD. So we'll see. But those are the ones I've written so far. Sure. So Annie's Life in Lists is, first of all, it's a unique format. It's written all as a series of lists. So, for example, 5 reasons I'm nervous about the first day of school, or 10 reasons I'm mad at my brother, that sort of thing. And I was inspired to write that because I noticed when my daughters were young, they would use lists in their writing a lot, not just, what they wanted for Christmas or their birthday, but also, I would go to bed at night and find that I had a list from my younger daughter of, I just think you should know these are 5 reasons that I was mad at my big sister today. And here's why we had this fight. And I started thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to write a book in that format? And first I thought something shorter, like a picture book, but then I took a writing workshop and started really just seeing how far I could go with it. And the instructor for the workshop said, I think this could be something longer. I think this could be a novel. And that's what it eventually became. And, so I've heard a lot that it appeals to readers who maybe so far have not been able to get into longer form books and are struggling a little bit to get engaged with chapter books, but this is something that has been a good first read for those sorts of readers, and because it's a little more accessible. And so that's been nice to hear. I used to work as a reading specialist actually in the schools in New York City, and so anytime I hear something engages more readers, that's great to hear. And the book is about a girl named Annie who moves from Brooklyn to a small town way outside the city called Clover Gap. I never say that it's in upstate New York, but a lot of people just seem to assume that's where it is. And so I've kind of gone with that. I myself grew up in a small town in North Carolina, and a lot of what I wrote about Clover Gap was inspired by my hometown. And I also used to live in Brooklyn. So I sort of had my main character do the reverse of what I had done. I moved from a small town eventually to the big city, and she moved from the big city to a small town. And then The 47 People You'll Meet in Middle School it's sort of written as a letter from a sister in 6th grade to her younger sister in 4th grade, who keeps asking her what middle school is like. And the whole year she's not really into discussing the details and, doesn't want to give her the lowdown, but then eventually she sort of has a moment of, okay, here's what you should know here. And the most important thing to know about middle school, and I think this is true of a lot of new places, is that the time almost passes. You sort of mark the passage of time with the relationships you build, and you'll notice that the people who you were close with at the beginning of your time in a new place are not necessarily the people you'll be close with a few years or even a few months later. And so she this is the older sister, Gus, is sort of schooling her younger sister on who she'll meet in middle school and what sorts of relationships she'll need to know about. Sort of a subplot there is also that the Gus and Louie's parents are going through a divorce, and the sisters are sort of reckoning with that and figuring out what that's going to mean for as far as changes in their lives. And so that's what that one is about. And then Elfie Unperfect, which comes out next year, is about a girl named Elfie who's in 5th grade and is very much a perfectionist, and about how she handles things when her life starts becoming very imperfect in different ways. I didn't really have any models that were written in lists. I mean, I used to, before I was a teacher in the city schools, I worked as a magazine editor and in women's magazine. And I know people say that, magazine editors love making lists, that they're also, it's just a quick sort of pithy way to present information. But I didn't have any examples of novels that were written in lists. Like I said before, I think my main inspiration was my kids. It's almost like A lot of kids, I think, have sort of a legal mind at work where they're trying to figure out a way to present a compelling case, in as few words as possible. And a list is a good way to do that. And, and it just, to me, became an interesting way for writing a narrative. And I have heard back from I got a letter actually from a dad, or an email from a dad in North Carolina. Ironically, it's my home state, but I don't think he knew that. But he said that, Annie's Life and Lists was the first book that his, I think, fourth grade daughter had really been able to get into, and she, had struggled with books of this length in the past, and this was the first time that she really, felt that she was able to really get into a longer book, and that was nice to hear. And I've since heard that from a few other readers as well. I think it's interesting to play with narrative structure. My third book actually is pretty straightforward narrative. But I don't know. I mean, I know as a reader myself, part of this is that I mostly read at night when I'm pretty tired. And so I appreciate a book that has a lot of breaks, or a lot of, like easy stopping places. And I know that often is true for young readers as well. I don't, young readers are reading before bedtime, or at least in my house they are. But I know a lot of times also kids' reading time gets interrupted a lot. They, have a certain amount of time to read during a school day, and then they have to move on to the next thing, or they're reading for a little while after school, and then they have to go to soccer practice or whatever. So I think, it's good to have a different kind of narrative voice. Often allows for breaks, which, is, I think, is important. And also I just think it's interesting and fun. It sort of reflects a bit about how we read in the real world, as far as reading emails from people, or texts, or letters. So. I think that I absolutely still have the voice of an 8, 9, and 10-year-old. Sometimes I often think, when I'm having a hard time moving on to my next chapter, or the next phase of the story, I think, okay, it shouldn't be this hard. Let's just pretend that you're writing an email to one of your good friends. And I'll think, how would I describe this to my friend if I were telling them about my day, or telling them about this embarrassing experience that I had in an email? And I just sort of use that voice. And I think that does show that my voice is still similar to a 10 to a 12-year-old voice. And yes, having my own kids does help. My kids are currently in 7th and 9th grades, and they definitely are an inspiration. And just seeing the things that go on in their lives that remind me of things that happened when I was their age. And, that really does help me think of story ideas, and also voice. I mean, the tricky thing is, I was actually editing a manuscript last night, and I was trying to think. I had used the word awesome too many times. And I looked at my 14-year-old and I said, do kids still say rad? And she because I was trying to think of another word to use. And she said, no, and laughed at me. And so you have to be really careful about that, unless you are definitely saying this story is set in 1985, where, people might use the word rad. So, I have to be careful and not use with voice. You have to be careful and not use slangy terms that might not be around in a year or so, because your book won't be published by then. So but having my own kids does help, just to sort of keep that energy and that voice in my head. Yes, my kids have read my books, and they are very good readers for me. Actually, one of my favorite stories I like to tell about that is when Annie's Life and Lists was in a pretty final stage. It was when the publishing industry, it's called an ARC, which stands for Advanced Review Copy, or Advanced Reader Copy. It's the copy that's sent to bookstores and reviewers to see if they want to review or sell the book. And very few changes should be made from that point on, because it's about ready to go to print. My daughter, who was 9 at the time, read the book and found an inconsistency. There was something, the kids in the book were going trick-or-treating, and there was a haunted house in the neighborhood, and in the book it said that all the windows were boarded up except for a window on the top floor. And then a few pages after that, the text said that they saw a ghostly figure through the first floor window. And I hadn't caught it, my editor hadn't caught it, my agent, like all these professional copy editors at Knopf hadn't caught it. And my daughter came into my room one night and said, "How could they see a ghost through the first floor window if they were boarded up?" And I said, "Oh man, you're right." So it's fascinating. Like kids have such an eye for those sorts of details, and it really keeps you on your toes. And yeah, so they've been really valuable readers to me as far as catching things like that, and also just really just encouraging me. I mean, mostly they're pretty kind when they read my books. I've always wanted to be a writer. I think, if you had asked me when I was 10 years old what I wanted to do when I grew up, I would say write books for kids. So I feel pretty lucky that I get to do it. Um, I really read so much when I was a kid. I still remember that there was a checkout limit at my town library of 8 books. And so I would just, especially during summer, would go and check out 8 books, read them and take them back, sometimes probably within the week. And um, check out 8 more, and just kind of kept a steady stream going. My dad also was a librarian, and he was a good source of new books, and just bringing things home from me that he would get at conferences. And so the writers, I mean, I write realistic fiction, and certainly my models for that as a kid were, the most iconic ones, Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary, were probably my two favorites. I really also loved the Little House on the Prairie books, and um, I loved I would say if I could write another genre or try another genre someday, it would probably be historic fiction. And one of my favorites in that genre as a kid and to this day was Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, by Mildred D. Taylor. So yeah, I would say those are my favorites. I mean, something that I say when I speak to kids in schools now is that I do wish that when I was a kid that I had had more exposure to books that showed me different, the lives of kids from different backgrounds and different parts of the world, and different experiences. And I do think we're lucky now that more of those voices are being heard and published, although we still have a long way to go. And so I always try to encourage my own kids to read books that reflect experiences of kids who are not like them. So I do say that I wish I had had more of that sort of exposure, but we're trying to get there. And then, but those were my favorites as a kid. I do. I think that's interesting. Certainly there are more complex issues being presented, and I think that's a good thing. There are fewer things that are considered taboo in children's literature. I think the publishing industry is starting to realize that kids can take more than we think they can, than grown-ups sometimes give them credit for. And so more experiences, a bigger range of experiences is being shown. I mean, I do think, like Beverly Cleary and Judy Blume were doing some of that when I was a kid. I know, certainly Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret was one of the first books, and still really one of the only books I can think of that explores, a girl going through puberty. And Beverly Cleary's Ramona and Her Father, explored a family's experience when a parent was unemployed. And but yeah, things were handled generally in most publishing a lot more gingerly than they are now. So I do think we've we've made certainly some progress in that regard, as far as not being afraid to show a wider range of potentially difficult experiences. I do read in my genre. I sort of have weird habits as far as that goes, though. I try not to read other middle grade novels while I'm drafting a new novel. I actually just finished the first draft of a new book that we'll see if and when that sees the light of day. But while I was writing it, I couldn't read any other middle grade novels because I worry it's almost like a la 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 kind of thing. I worry that it's going to unintentionally filter into my brain somehow, and or give me mental blocks. So when I'm drafting, I don't. But I just finished drafting, and which is fun because then I can sort of tackle the pile of middle grade books that I've been wanting to read. I'm almost finished with Front Desk by Kelly Yang, which is excellent. I had heard so many things about it, and talk about a book that gives you a window into somebody else's experience. It's from the point of view of a kid who, I think she's 10, and her parents, or her whole family are immigrants from China, and they're working at a hotel, and they have very serious financial struggles, and it's just so interesting to me. My younger daughter actually finished it before I did, and loved it. And so I do read a lot of other middle grade novels, and that's just the latest one. But I just have to time it when I'm writing something new. That's when I read adult books. It's really exciting being part of the South Orange Maplewood literary community. I think first and foremost, it's such a great community in general for readers. And, most writers are readers, and, voracious readers. And just between our two town libraries and Words Bookstore and the book festival, it's such a great community for readers. And not to mention that there are just people here with so many different and interesting backgrounds. And it's a community that's really open to, I think, open to new ideas, and to listening and learning about other people's experiences, which that in itself makes it a great community for writers. Just to have an environment where you can learn about other people's experiences that are very different from your own. So that has been great. And then just as far as getting to know the other writers here who are just fantastic. And I, am in awe of all of them, and so excited when I come across the work of a new writer and then find out, oh my gosh, they live in Maplewood or they live in South Orange. So just, it's almost like there's something in the air here that makes it a good place for writers. And I've felt really lucky to be able to raise a family and a writing career here.